Invito subito Sally Brown e Phil Reis a venire qui al tavolo e a presentarci il loro lavoro. Sappiate che Sally l'ho conosciuta sui libri, nel senso che mi sono imbattuta sui libri, con i libri di Sally, mi sono imbattuta nei suoi articoli, nei suoi libri, e l'ho conosciuta via mail ancora anni fa, come una grande ricercatrice che si occupa di assessment, e oggi veramente anche per me è un'emozione darle la parola a questo tavolo, poiché anche per me è stata così un mito, no? Quelli che scrivono in grande, che fanno le cose in grande, quindi benvenuta, veramente grazie a Sally e suo marito, e non credo che serva l'attività interattiva, perché loro sono già interattivi di per sé, quindi non credo che la nostra attività, mia e di Anna, che avevamo preparato, serva. Comunque eventualmente poi ci pensiamo, vediamo un po' come vanno le cose. Quindi invito Sally, please Sally and please Phil.
And thanking you very much, all of you, for inviting me and my husband to this wonderful room, in this wonderful university, in this fabulous city, where we're going to have a chance to talk about some of the things that matter most to my husband and I. Now, Phil and I have been academic colleagues for 30 years. We have been married for 20. Please, can I tell you that the very best basis for a marriage is an academic background first. 10 years of writing together means that you've got a very good idea what that person is like beforehand. Now, we're going to be working in English because, frankly, our Italian isn't good enough. But everything you see on screen is going to be, it is now on both of our websites. So if you want the slides, if you want to follow the slides, if you want to keep the slides, if you want to use the slides, if you want to plagiarize the slides, everything we do, because we're very old, is regarded as a complete open access resource. So if you look on our websites, Google us, you'll find us, sally-brown.net, phil-race.co.uk. Google us. You have years and years worth of presentations, downloads, documents, which are all free for you to use. So please don't feel you need to write anything, it's all here. So, briefly, a word of introduction from me. I'm Sally Brown. I'm the happiest woman on earth because I'm semi-retired. I have 2 days a week with me nepoti, my grandchildren, learning about learning. And I have 2 days a week working in universities around Europe, certainly, and beyond. Phil, who are you?
I'm Phil Race. I'm the happiest man in the world because I married to Sally. I have to say that. I'm also very happy to be here in Padova and this afternoon to be seeing Galileo's desk. Very interested in Galileo. Galileo once said, "You can't teach a man anything, you can only help him to learn." So I rarely use the word teacher. I rarely use the word assessment. Kay was saying yesterday she would rather not use the word assessment. I'm with Kay there. I don't often talk about teachers. I'm interested in learning, in helping students to learn, and a teacher's job is to make learning happen, which is the title of one of my books. And I think making learning happen is something we all want to try to do. But whether we can actually teach. Galileo only said, you can't teach a man anything I don't know about women.
Phil and I worked in Singapore once, and somebody's feedback said, Sally Brown is a very bossy lady, but Phil Race is nice. So, in a joint presentation, we have demarcation points. So we're going to be working through 10 factors, taking it strictly in turn, and I'm largely not allowed to interrupt when it's his turn. Largely. Oh, you need to click it on. Oh. Advance. Right arrow. Oh, right arrow, yes. So, here are 10 things we're going to focus on today, and you can see we're going to take it in turns. Assessment, as we've been saying throughout the conference, must be for, not just of learning. It must be for learning, because that's what our universities require of us, but not just of. Constructive alignment must work in practice for students and for us. Assessment must be fit for purpose. That's my thing. Feedback must support the other factors underpinning learning. Assessment must engage students in active tasks. Assessment must be valid. We need to rebalance formative and summative assessment. Assessment must be fair and reliable. Good assessments can really help students to stay at university and to achieve, and assessment must be manageable for us and students. Phil, why don't you take a seat? So, throughout the conference, we've been hearing valuation must be not just of learning, but pour learning, for learning. The prepositions are really important. And I would argue that everything we ask students to do must be productive, not just reproductive. That's logical, isn't it? Yeah? So, we want students to demonstrate how they use the learning. And would you pour me some water, please? Yesterday, we were talking about the nature of learning. And we argue very strongly that learning is not filling an empty beaker. I'm the teacher, I'm pouring learning into you. That's not learning. Assessment is instead an engagement, and the students who have learned need to demonstrate how that learning's happening, not just repeating. In your primary school, that's absolutely true. Yes, madam. Yes, madam. In your primary school, this is what we do with children. This is what I do on Mondays and Tuesdays. We don't say, right, Lucas, now we're going to learn colours. Here are some bricks, blue, blue. It doesn't work like that, but it does work. Where's the blue car, Lucas? Where's the red? Can you see any purple? Yeah, etc. Assignments that model the kinds of activities that graduates will be undertaking later in life are more valuable than ones that just focus on content. So don't just tell me what you've heard me say, but think about life after university and what's going to happen next, and how what your students learn is going to be useful. I like the utility of learning. So, we also want students to be learning actually during the task. It isn't a matter of learning happening later. It has to happen while we're doing it now. Phil and I were talking this morning about note-taking. How do you take notes in a lecture? I used to take notes in a lecture where I would have 14 pages of notes at the end of a lecture. Phil would take his notes and write them out again, but his notes had to be on 2 sides of A4. Different approaches, different uses. Which is the most useful? Mine was simply reproductive. His was productive. And I think we need to make sure that the feedback we give to students actually is formative, informative, transformative. That is to say, the feedback must change the student's behaviour. And if it doesn't change the student's behaviour, then it's no point doing it. What is the point of doing corrections if it doesn't lead to change? Therefore, it becomes feed forward. And here I refer, there's lots of references in this work, but here I refer to a major project by the UK Higher Education Academy that I was involved in, that is an online resource. Many of the resources I cite are online and is very useful. Phil, I'm going to sit down and pass to you.
Thank you. What does constructive alignment mean? Constructive alignment must work in practice for students to be able to link assessment and feedback. But what does it mean? It's one of these phrases that's in almost everything that we see. Where do we see our students? We tend to see our students face-to-face in rooms like this. Face-to-face, what have we got that we haven't got in writing, we haven't got on a screen? We've got some of these tools: tone of voice, body language, facial expression, gesture, eye contact. We can look at people, we can engage them in that way, they can look at us. The chance to repeat things. I can say something and someone looks puzzled and I can say it a different way until you smile, and then I know it's there. We haven't got those in writing, we haven't got those in books, we haven't got those in handouts. We have these things face to face with students. The chance to respond to puzzled looks. We've got all of these things face to face. I do worry a lot about feedback and feed forward being written, because we haven't got these tools. Feedback and feed forward, I think, work much better when all of these tools are at our disposal. We can look, we can have, David said yesterday, dialogue. We can have dialogue face to face with students. We can hear their questions, they can hear our replies, they can see our passion, they can see our interest. None of that really comes across on a book, on a page, on a screen. So that's the tools we've got when we're in a lecture, in a seminar, or even one-to-one with students. We've got all these tools and many more. What are we supposed to be trying to do? Now, the paragraph I've put at the top there contains three things. Assessment criteria. Assessment criteria are very important for students. It's the assessment criteria that will determine their fate, determine their degree, determine their qualifications. What do we measure in assessment? We measure what students do, what they write, what they show, or how they think, that sort of thing. We measure evidence of achievement. What evidence of achievement? Achievement of the intended learning outcomes, the intention of the course of study. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what teaching means, if you like. We're trying to get students to evidence their achievement so that we can measure it using assessment criteria. Some of those tools, though, and some of those things we haven't got on a piece of paper, we haven't got in a written exam, we haven't got in a written essay. That is just paper. We can't actually do a lot of that just in words on paper, words in books, or whatever. Problem with the bit at the top of the slide is it's in a rather foreign language. It's in academic language. What does it mean to students? I've asked students, what do these things mean? What does assessment criteria, evidence of achievement, learning outcomes mean to you? I always listen to students. I try to do what students think more than what I read in a book sometimes. Students tell me what these things mean as 3 questions. Students always want to know, what am I expected to do with this? You give them a book to read, what am I expected to do with what I read? You give them a handout, what am I expected to do with this? You refer them to the literature, what will I be expected to write in an examination answer, and so on. Students always have this question. You might have this question in this room now. You're listening to me, what am I expected to do with this? Students also want to know, whatever it is that's expected, what does a good one look like? And what does a poor one look like? I don't believe in just showing students exemplars. I'm a bit wary of the word exemplar, because they like to see good examples, which might be an exemplar, but they also like to see, need to see, what goes wrong. What are the mistakes? What are the things to avoid? David mentioned Royce Sadler yesterday. Royce Sadler says that students need to see a variety of works of different standard so that they can judge where they're going to go. So students need to see examples of good work, but also examples of poor work, so they know what's wrong with it. And we can get them to tell us what's wrong with it. We can get them making informed judgments. We were talking a lot yesterday about judgments. The third question students want to know, this bit of curriculum we're doing in this lecture, where does this fit in to the big picture? Where is this in the whole picture, in the whole course, in the whole module? Where is this in my life? That, I believe, is what constructive alignment that John Biggs talks about means. If we're answering those 3 questions for students, if we're using those tools that we have face-to-face in sessions like this with students, we're on the way to joined up thinking, we're on the way to linking these things together in ways that students can understand.
So, Phil said, what do we expect you to do as a result of listening to us? Well, one thing you can do is tweet, right? Phil's Twitter tag is @RacePhil. Mine is @Prof Sally Brown. But if you want to do something interesting on a Wednesday night, tonight, Fabio, you do it too. On a Wednesday night on this hashtag, LTHE chat, at 2000 hours GMT, an international community of educationalists talk in tweets for an hour. It's very intensive. Phil and I have 2 machines open all the time. And it's a really lively way to get perspectives from all over Europe, from Australia, New Zealand, from Hong Kong, from Singapore, from the People's Republic, lots of places on a Wednesday evening. It's the most exhausting thing you'll do on a Wednesday evening, I think. Is that right, Fabio? But it's very interesting. So, 2100, is it? In your time, 9 o'clock tonight. Yeah. Yeah, no we won't, we're on holiday after today. So, authentic assessment is something, authentica, yes, something that matters really to me, because I want assessment that works hard, assessment that earns its keep, assessment that is really fit for purpose. And I ask 5 very simple questions. Before you start assessing, why are you assessing at this point? For early stage students, are you building their confidence? Middle stage students, are you checking their understanding? A little further on, are you helping them make choices about what course to take? Right towards the end, is this person going to be a safe doctor, teacher, bridge engineer, physiotherapist? fitness to practice. So why are you doing it? Because I argue that you can't make any decisions about what to do or how to do it until you know what your purpose on this occasion with these students is. This applies in every stage, from early years, I think, right through into higher education. Next one, what is it you're assessing? Are you assessing what's produced as a result? That may be the case. Or are you assessing the process by which that student has achieved that point? So, for example, architecture students, it's as important what you choose not to do as what you choose to do. So that process may be the most important thing. Theory or practice? Now, when you go to have an injection, would you like your injection by the doctor or the nurse? Hands up if you'd like the doctor to give you the injection. You're not allowed to say no injections, Kay. Everybody has to have them. Right. If you'd like the nurse to give you an injection. Perché? Why? 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 Right. So the nurse does it every day. The nurse takes lots and lots of practice. The nurse injects oranges before she starts using human flesh. Did you know that? They practice on fruit, and then they do it, and they are very careful, and they do it often, and they don't hurt as much. Because the doctor may be a very good doctor, but they are probably more theory-orientated. The nurse is very theoretically soundly prepared, but has practice. So, but we want both. We want our engineering students not just to create wonderful designs, but actually to be employable as a bridge engineer. We want our pharmacist not to be able to just calculate what doses of insulin to give to a diabetic, but actually not to kill anyone. Yes? It's very important that people have both. Phil would argue that what we often argue is what is easy to assess, or we assess what we always have assessed. So we do it in the same way because that's how we were assessed, and that's the right way to assess because it's how we were assessed, and we're here, so it must be right. Yes? Sometimes we have to think quite radically. Then the next thing, how do we assess students? I think we talked yesterday about the fact that the main ways of assessing students, Kay, it was you talked about it, wasn't it? Essays, reports, exams. But years ago, when I wrote a book with Peter Knight, we identified 174 methods by which people assess in higher education. Portfolios, in-tray exercises, posters, assessed seminars, lots of forms of assessment, and yet we keep coming back to something that's very straightforward, that's written. You use more oral assessment than we do in the UK, but even so, the focus on what we do, where we sit students down in an exam room, where you can smell the tension, the nerves, where people are under pressure, their feet are sweating, their hands are trembling, and we make them do it because we did it, so it must have been right, yes? Because it produced wonderful people like us. Let's use some more methods. Let's not just choose a method because it's fashionable. Let's choose a method because it fits the purpose, that it's right for the students. That actually it helps us demonstrate that the students are capable, not just knowledgeable. They can do as well as know. And I think a really helpful question to ask about your final year assessment is, where in your final year assessment do you give students to do things that they can talk about at job interviews? So when they go into a job interview and the interviewer says, can you give me an example of where you've had to work without supervision on a project? Or can you give me an example where you've had to work with difficult people and how you handled it? Or can you give me an example of how you've had to work with incomplete information and you've had to do information retrieval which required you to evaluate your sources of data? Those kinds of questions are the kinds of questions that should be underpinning your assignments. Yes? That makes sense, doesn't it? And so, the last one, who is best placed to assess? Now, 85% of assessment in the UK uses 3 methods: exams, reports, unseen, time-constrained exams, reports, and essays. We use, in Britain, 90% of our assessment is tutor assessment. But actually, both David and Kay yesterday, and the other person, Deborah, were talking about the importance, the central importance of developing students' own self-interrogatory capabilities of assessing themselves and each other's. And so there is no doubt that people who are good at assessing themselves and each other actually become more effective and capable, not just as graduate students, but as citizens. So let's use peers more. Let's use practice tutors more. Let's use managers more. If we want to know if a doctor is good at taking information from a student, from a patient, we could ask him to write about how he gets information from a patient, how he takes a history, or we could actually ask the patient. We could ask the recipient of his professional capabilities. Finally, if you really want to destroy students' chances, if you really want high amounts of mental health problems, then only assess once at the very end of the seminar with no formative opportunities, no incremental feedback, no support at all. One off, in Spanish it's called subito muerto. Yeah? What's it called in Italian? Yeah, something similar. Sudden death. Yeah? Sudden death. Think about a master's program. One assessment right at the end. No practice runs. Subito muerto.
I want us to think about learning. I've been asking students, asking all sorts of people about how they learn for the last 30 years. And probably this is about 200,000 people to date. I asked them 6 questions about how they learn, and these 7 factors come out of their answers. I've done this with all sorts of people, students in all sorts of disciplines. I've done it with priests, I've done it with army officers, I've done it with microbiologists, police persons. The answers are all very similar. The answers are all the same. We've got the same sorts of brain. Now, for a long time, I haven't been satisfied with the way how we learn is written up in the literature, so I just keep asking people and finding the same factors. Starting from the middle, the words in the yellow circle, wanting to learn, that's motivation, but also needing to learn. These 2 things are closely connected together, but sometimes quite different. Sometimes we really, really want to learn. Learning is probably going to be successful. Sometimes we don't want to learn, but we really need to learn. We need to get the degree, we need to get the qualification. That also can be successful. It's not as happy as wanting to learn, but it'll work. Better still, of course, if we want to learn and need to learn, it's a good start. I tend not to use these words, but it does mean the same thing. But sometimes the people that talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation mix them up and confuse people with them. So I don't use those words much. But nothing happens, no learning happens until there's some doing. Some action, some writing, some speaking, some making something, some drawing something. I was really privileged to see the artistry that happened in 1305 to 1307, the Giotto paintings last night. That is evidence of doing, 2 years worth of doing. Now, we can want to learn something, need to learn something, and do it, but still haven't got our heads around it. We still don't know what it means. So the words I use for for getting one's head around it, making sense. Actually, it's a continuous process, because we are making sense of something, then next day we make more sense of it. Then next day we make more sense of it. It's a continuous, ongoing process. How do we know whether we're making sense of something successfully? That's where feedback comes in. Comparing other people's reactions, other people's responses, other evidence around us, and internalizing that. I like the generative feedback idea that you were talking about yesterday. We need to be doing this all the time. But that's only part of the journey. A lot of learning happens by speaking. If I've studied something and I've tried to make sense of it, and then I have a room full of students I'm explaining it to, I find more sense. I know it better after I've tried to explain it than I knew it before. I don't think learning is ever complete until one has spoken it, explained it to fellow human beings. But the outer circle there, and I call these ripples on the pond because they all affect each other. They all affect each other all the time. The outer circle is assessing. One of the quickest ways to intensify students' learning, to deepen students' learning, is to get them assessing, get them making informed judgments about things we show them, things we give them to judge. If we give students a pile of essays, a set of reports, and say, working together, working in twos or threes, find the best ones, find the worst ones, they're assessing these things, they're looking for the differences. If they're doing this in twos or threes, they're also verbalizing, they're talking. So the talking is very much part of it. So those 7 factors, I believe, are factors underpinning the ongoing process of learning. So, talking yesterday about feedback and feed forward, that needs to take its place in that picture. Feedback needs to help people to want to learn, to inspire them, enthuse them, excite them. Feedback also needs to clarify what they need to do, what is outstanding, what they have to do that they haven't yet achieved. Feedback can help to do this. Learning happens by doing, so feedback needs to be usable to do something with it, to act on it, to turn it into something, to improve what's going on. Feedback can help that generative process of learning, can help the making sense. Feedback can enhance the learning, it can help students to engage in real dialogue. That's where the learning really happens. And getting students to use feedback to make informed judgments on other things and to give them feedback on their making informed judgments can be really causing all of those processes to reverberate. We need to be continuously helping students to build on things they've already done to improve and develop. I think it was Scuola said a long time ago, start with what the student already knows and work from there. And so often, we haven't the time or we haven't the energy to find out what the students already know. The more I know about what a group of students knows, the better I can start working with them rather than talking to them.
Phil and I have very different styles. He has lots of colour in his slides and I have lots of words, and that's really interesting. Here is a list that Phil and I have made of some of the kinds of things that you can ask students to do which will make them active rather than passive. Kay, you might like these. Kay and I are doing a little project on something and this might be useful. So, if you would like to see these methods explicated in more detail, I can do no more than refer you to my 2015 text, which is in the references. Your Grace. Oh, no, that was mine. Look at the picture. What can you see? What can you see? What's happening? These students are being assessed. Yes? These are music technology degree students who are being assessed, and so are the people this side, because this side are the performers, that side are the music students. And who's in charge? Well, the guy in the white t-shirt is in control of the means of production, the mouse. Everybody is engaged. Everybody is taking part. This is one of our toughest demographics in the UK. White working class boys fail and drop out and underperform. We got these students at the university I used to work at really engaged by giving them lots of authentic assessment experiences. So this photograph shows students who are learning through assessment. Assessment must be valid, Your Honour.
I should just pause for a moment because when you were up there, I wasn't giving you the beady eye. I was actually assessing you.
Ah! How did I do?
You did brilliantly, much better than me.
Oh, fine.
Yes. But the reason is, why did Sally do so brilliantly? Now, if traditional methods of assessment, I would give Sally this, and I'd give her a piece of paper, and I'd say, show me how clever you are using that and using this. I can't believe that in 2017 we still do this. This is crazy. It still has emphasis. Now, what Sally was doing when I was assessing her, she was listening and talking in Italian, getting you to talk in Italian. She was causing lots of thinking to happen there, much more than I can do from here. And so that's why you did so tremendously successful. And that list of things that you had a lot of things that didn't depend on a pen and didn't depend on a piece of paper. Now, people sometimes say, well, in 2017, we now have computers and we use fingers on a keyboard. I like using fingers on a keyboard, but it is so easy on a computer to find what everybody else in the world has said about something and to take bits of this and bits of that and bits of the other. Is it original thought anymore? So computer-based assessment has its dangers as well. Which brings back, assessment must be valid. There are 2 or 3 things that assessment must be: valid, reliable, fair, etc. Just talking valid. To me, that means, are we actually measuring what we set out to measure? With students, I want to measure what they can do, what they can create, what they can do that I can't do. Stuck again. Or are we measuring things that are less important? That's one of my worries about written assessment. We can measure spelling, we can measure grammar and punctuation. Can we measure creativity, originality? Not as easily. And sometimes we end up that the difference between a good piece of work and a less good piece of work is the quality of the writing or the quality of the words used, rather than the quality of the thinking, the depth of the thinking. That is not valid assessment. It's going to work. If we are just measuring what students can write about what they were told, about what they read, about what they remember from what they learned, that isn't, to me, valid assessment. That is just an echo of the learning. Most traditional, time-constrained, unseen written exams, they're quite reliable. They're quite transparent. Students know how they work, but they're not valid.
So, what we don't do, sit down now, dear, not really measuring the most sensible possible way that students' achievement of published learning outcomes. We need to rebalance formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment is formative, informative, transformative. Formative assessment carries lots of words. Formative assessment is usually continuous. Summative assessment is about summing up, about making a judgment. Summative assessment has lots of numbers and grades. Summative assessment, its principal purpose is judgment, and it's normally at the end of a process. So what we need to do is rebalance, use more formative assessment and less summative assessment. But as Kay said yesterday, the summative assessment must be used rigorously but sparingly. Assessment must be fair and fairly snappy.
The word reliable is used a lot in the English language literature, but it really boils down to being fair. Now, how many of you remember some assessment that wasn't fair? Am I the only one that remembers an assessment that wasn't fair, where you didn't get the marks you deserved, or where you got more marks than you deserved? Students are very aware of whether assessment is fair or not. If our assessment isn't fair, they feel badly treated, justly badly treated, and their trust in us has gone. If anything we do is unfair, we've lost our students. All the more reason that students need to know how assessment works, how our minds work when we assess what they do, which is why I so strongly believe in self-assessment and peer assessment, helping students find out how it works by doing it, by assessing their own work, by measuring it, by measuring other people's work, and giving feedback on this. The more they know how it works, the more they can believe it is fair. In making assessment fair, we've got to get away from putting down the number we first thought of. Now, what I mean is, if I'm reading an examination answer or an essay, and I pick up my pen to give it a grade, is that grade going to be right? If I come back 3 days later and look at the same piece of work, will I give it the same grade? Lots of research has shown that I wouldn't. If you revisit things you've already marked, you will have seen maybe better examples, maybe worse examples, and you would have a different interpretation of that piece. So fairness is very, very difficult to achieve. It is better, of course, if Sally assesses it and I assess it, and we see whether we agree.
I've just drawn an elephant.
Right.
A really high mark is a bit like an elephant. I can't draw it very well, but I know one when I see one.
Good point. So Sally and I, if we agree on an assessment, we get the same mark. In fact, we did that a couple of days ago. Were we right? That's just Sally and I. It would be much better if all of you did this assessment as well and we saw what the range was. But we're talking really about getting a lot of different perspectives on what the words mean. So double marking certainly does reveal serious inconsistencies when you have a lot of markers there. I think isn't going to go. Right. But we're talking about blind anonymous double marking. But it isn't always possible, nor manageable to have everyone doing the same thing. So assessment being fair is always debatable. The bottom line of that, though, is can we justify our marks to students? Whatever mark or grade you get, I need to be able to explain to you why it was that and not higher, why it was that and not lower. And that is very, very difficult.
So, one of my passions in life is around students, particularly in the UK with high fees, but actually anywhere, who invest in going to university because the university has let them in, and then they are unsupported or actively de-incentivized to stay in university. I don't want students to drop out. I have two sons, both of whom dropped out of university, both of whom were bruised by it, went back and got degrees. Let's stop doing that to students. Students drop out if they don't know how they're doing. So that means assessment's got to be frequent. They don't do well and they drop out if they're overwhelmed, if there's too much assessment. So maybe we should thin down the assessment, but make it really good when we do it. When they've got too many pieces of work coming in on the same day, so let's get people to talk to each other and say, well, I'm giving them an essay on that day. Don't give them an essay within 2 days of it. Students drop out if they think the work is pointless. So let's instead give them authentic assessment. Students drop out if they think other students are getting away with cheating. So let's make sure that the assessment we use is not really easy to cheat on. And that means, I think, getting students to show us and other students their work regularly so they can't fake it and they can't buy it on the internet. They drop out if they don't feel up to the task. So let's make early assessments confidence building, not confidence destroying. And students drop out if they don't know what they're doing. So let's help students understand the rules of the game, by which I mean let's help them develop assessment literacy. So assessment needs to be fair, clear, developmental, informative, purposeful, and building resilience. And here I refer to the work of psychologist Carol Dweck, who, an American psychologist. You can find a fabulous TED talk by Carol Dweck, and it's really worth looking at. She's been a very shaping influence on my work. And students need clear briefing and opportunities, as Roy Sadler says, to look at what good work looks like, to practice before the summative event, to ask questions without looking stupid, and to get formative feedback. Phil, the last word to you.
I never get the last word. Sally will be talking about assessment literacy as part of our afternoon workshop, and I've learned a lot from your assessment literacy stuff as well. Assessment must be manageable. Those of you who are students, do you spend a lot of time preparing for and then writing assessed work? Do you spend a lot of energy doing that? Yes? Those of you who are teaching, do you spend a lot of your life marking assessment work, judging assessed work, etc.? Do you spend forever doing this? What will happen if in 2 years' time you have 4 times as many students? That work will increase, etc. We've got to make assessment manageable. We've got to make the sizes manageable and the processes manageable. And we haven't achieved that yet. Which one is it? Right. It's got to be manageable for us and for students. What we don't want to do is to drive students towards surface learning. What often happens with exams, I think one of you were talking about this yesterday, people will learn something for an exam, okay, learn for an exam, then another exam is coming tomorrow, almost consciously discard what was learned for the first exam and try to get ready for the second exam. We encourage surface learning too often by our assessment processes. The time we spend on assessment, the time students spend doing assessed work, can be the basis of lots and lots of feedback, feed-forward, dialogue, rather than monologue. And I think that is the way forward. That's my last brief word.
But it doesn't get the last word, because I always do. So we argue that assessment is really integral to learning. It has to bring about cambio, change, a positive impact on student. We need to address how students really learn in designing the assessment. Assessment isn't separate. Assessment is part of it. And we finish with saying, designing good assessment and feedback is difficult, complicated, demanding, but hugely worthwhile, because I argue that in the days where students can find content anywhere, in universities, assessment is the key locus of engagement between the student and the university. Thank you.